We warmly welcome you to the second day of Jornada Nacional 2025, organized by PRONI and the British Council. It is my pleasure to welcome you again, the specialized educational advisors and English teachers from Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Peru, who are joining us in this space with professional learning and development. Welcome. Today, we will highlight the importance of formative assessment as a continuous process that supports learning. We will also focus on PRONI support materials for students from the third grade of preschool to the sixth grade of primary school, as well as for free English textbooks used at secondary level. Throughout the presentations, we will discuss the design criteria that guided their development, the integration of projects, how content was organized and selected, considering key aspects such as grammar, vocabulary, and other integrated projects, how content was organized and selected to encourage interdisciplinary work. In addition, we will examine the connection between English teaching and the 2022 curriculum plan. We are aware that some of the participants had troubles with the links from yesterday. Therefore, we are sharing now the link and the QR on the screen, and you can also fill in the pin messages so you can register your attendances from yesterday's session. So don't worry, teachers, you are able to manage your attendance from yesterday. Now, we will go and we will have some quick reminders about our house rules. Please note that the session times announced in the programming are based on Central Mexico time. We invite you to participate in the chat with openness and cordiality, recognizing that respectful exchange enriches collective learning. It is essential to register your attendance via the survey that will be shared again at the end of the day. It is not necessary for you to share your personal details in the chat. Also, we ask you to carefully verify the information you enter in the forms, as your certificate will be issued according to the name that you have registered. Please remember that all sessions held during these days will be recorded and you will be able to watch them again and until October 31st, using the links provided in your programming. Regarding the access to broadcasts, the process is very simple. You must enter the YouTube link provided in the official programming for each session. Remember, at the end of each session, there will be a short break before continuing with the next presentation. You can access the next session by clicking on the button Join Here or Entre Aquí, found in the programming activities. Welcome everyone again, and we are about to begin our ponencias. So for the first presentation of the day, it is my pleasure to introduce Aiden Holland, who will be sharing with us the topic Formative Assessment in English Language Classrooms, Supporting Engagement and Reflection. Aiden Holland is working as a Global Assessment Solution Manager with Europe. He has been working for the British Council in a variety of roles since 2009. He has over 20 years of international experience in teaching and teacher training, and almost a decade of experience in academic management positions, working in teaching management, global product management, and global education reform projects. He holds an MA in TFL SL from the University of Birmingham and an MA in a language testing with the University of Lancaster. He is currently based in Spain. So let's give a round of applause to Aiden.
Hello everyone, my name is Aiden Holland, and today I'm going to be talking about formative assessment in the English language classroom. We're going to be looking at different ways we can support engagement and reflection through a formative approach to assessment. In today's session, we're going to be covering the following three areas. We're going to start by thinking about a definition for assessment. Then we'll move on to consider a number of different types of assessment, comparing formative assessment with summative, and then looking at some different types of formative assessment. Then in the last part of the presentation, we'll be looking at some different assessment scenarios and using each one to think about which approach teachers are taking and how they're doing it. I'm going to include some spots for reflection during the presentation. So when I do, I'll ask you to spend 20 to 30 seconds thinking about some of the questions on the screen, and then I'll comment on them. Let's start with one of these reflection sections. I'd like you to spend around 20 or 30 seconds thinking about these three questions. What does assessment mean? What's the definition for assessment? How is assessment different from a test? And what are some different types of assessment? Maybe you can think of some different types that you use in your own classrooms. So I'll give you around 20, 30 seconds for that. So looking at this definition from Chappell and Brindley, they define assessment in the context of language, teaching and learning as referring to the act of collecting information and making judgments about a learner's knowledge or a language and ability to use it. This is summarized in the arrow at the bottom of the screen. So we're collecting information, which on a simple level could be maybe observing students doing a speaking task, making an evaluation, so deciding whether the students are achieving the learning intention that you had for that task. Maybe it's to speak more fluently, maybe it's to organize their ideas more effectively, maybe it's to use potentially a vocabulary set or talk about a specific topic, and then make a decision. Again, in this case, the decision might be to continue on to the next stage of the learning or repeat the same learning activity based on some feedback that you're giving to them. If we want to think about this on a more formal level, this might be doing a writing task, explaining what they have to do. The collection of information would be collecting the written tasks that they've done maybe for homework, making an evaluation of that based on some criteria, organisation, content, lexical control, etc. And then making a decision as to whether you need to repeat that style of writing in that learning period or whether you can move on to the next one. This is a really important decision, a really important definition to frame our discussion over the next 45 minutes. So I think most people think when they think about assessment of a test, and this is because tests are very ubiquitous in society. All of us do tests. It's a very, very common form of assessment. A test is a form of assessment, but an assessment isn't and shouldn't always be a test, as I'm sure you agree, and I'm sure you use different forms of assessment in your classrooms. I just want to revise a few of the key features of what defines a test. So we're looking at a specific form of assessment, as I've mentioned. So it's structured and formal. It might have, say, a section on each of the skills. If we're talking about language tests, it might be an end of unit test, which tests grammar, vocabulary, reading and listening, for example. It could be a specific, maybe just an oral proficiency test. Whatever it is, it's got a clear structure to it. Within the test, and again, depending on the formality of the test, it might have more or fewer tasks, but the task will be standardized so that all test takers receive the same conditions for those task types. So the instructions will be standardized. Say, for example, the IELTS speaking exam has a very standardized measure, so examiners are trained meticulously to deliver the same experience to each speaking candidate. It's done under controlled conditions, so there are clear time limits, set instructions, and a fixed format. There are clear systems for scoring to ensure objectivity with the receptive skills. That's very much set before the test is taken. With the productive skills, this is more to do with examiner standardization and monitoring. What's very important is that a test is a snapshot. It's like a photograph in time, and it gives you an impression of the ability of the student at that moment, which could have been influenced by many different factors. They're often used as decision-making tools. So to decide whether a student can progress to another course, can enter into an institution, to collect a visa, for example. So all of these things are really key features of a test. During this session, we're going to be very much focusing on a wider array of assessment tools that are not tests. However, tests are always present in any classroom assessment approach. They will be either within it or something that students might be preparing for externally. Let's think of some of the different types of tests that students might be preparing for, either within their institution or nationally for national exams, or maybe even international. They may be doing placement tests into institutions such as schools or universities, admissions tests to access a course, achievement tests within course to see if they've learned a particular set of content, a diagnostic test to see, for the teacher to see what particularly students need to focus on more of during a course, filtering to decide on the most able candidates to enter into a program which may have limited places, and a proficiency test is a general test of language which doesn't assume students are following any particular course. All of these tests have a lot of crossover. So many of the tests, for example, on the screen are often proficiency tests. So they might want to test the 4 skills. And there are often not 100% clear distinctions between, say, an admissions or a filtering test, for example. So there is a lot of crossover. So just to summarize, summative versus formative assessment, to contrast the two. Summative is very much tests. So we're evaluating students and your own teaching after you finish the teaching. Maybe if you're doing it, you're finishing it at the end of a unit or a course, maybe a progress test or an achievement test appropriately. It's used to report to parents and the school about progress students have made. If it's external to a course, it might be a national or international exam, such as the Cambridge Suite of Exams, IELTS or APTIS. Formative assessment, however, doesn't or shouldn't give a alphanumeric grade. The information that it generates should be channeled back to students to support them understanding where they can most effectively direct their attention to continue with their learning. It helps guide and monitor learning and teaching while it's still in progress, and it must be non-threatening as a result. So it shouldn't be channeled into necessarily a formal reporting mechanism, which is the arena of summative testing. That's a few definitions which I think are nice to summarize the difference between summative and formative assessment. I'll give you 10 seconds to read that. So when the cook tastes the soup, that's formative assessment. When the customer tastes the soup, that's summative assessment. It's quite a nice way of understanding how we can still make changes in formative assessment, but with summative assessment, that's very much there are no chances after it to modify the soup or to change the photo that's been taken. Classroom-based assessment is the wider ecosystem of assessment in which tests may probably well sit. It's all up, however, it includes so much more, and I'll give you 10 seconds to read this slide now. It's all of those activities undertaken by teachers and their students, which provide information to be used as feedback to modify teaching and learning activities in which they're engaged. The majority of these will be formatively oriented classroom activities and tasks. However, there may be some tests which generate information which is then used to exemplify progress to other people or justify the effectiveness of a course, and they would be a summative element. We will be unpacking all of these ideas in concrete examples in a couple of slides. So, classroom assessment. Let's think of some concrete examples of the different tools that might be used, often commonly used by teachers in the language classroom and beyond, to support students to see their progress. Within all of these, I'm assuming that there is an element of alignment to the common European framework of languages within the education systems that you're working. Maybe not to the CEFR, but maybe to some kind of framework which is documenting what language proficiency is, and the different levels that students might move through to get from an elementary level to a proficient level of English, for example. There are some common formative assessment tools, and starting from the top, they are naturally aligned to the order that they might be done in the classroom. So teachers often can share learning aims, or we might call them learning intentions, from the beginning of the class in a teacher plenary with students, in which they explain what they're going to do over the course of the next lesson or series of lessons potentially. Once they've done that and they start setting up their activities, teachers question their students a lot to try and understand what the students have understood. So this idea of rich questioning is something that's done on the spot regularly. It's very frequent in the classroom, and it gives the teacher a rich source of information about how the students are reacting to the tasks and the extent to which they've understood the things that they've been asked to do. This goes hand in hand with observation and feedback, in which the teacher is going to be silently seeing what the students are doing and gently giving them some support and positive encouragement. If we're looking at tasks that generate written samples of language, so pieces of writing, then that feedback may be also more formal, but it's still to be used for the student to support their learning. Self and peer assessments as a tool, very oriented towards a formative approach, and would generally be used towards the end of a learning sequence, or the arc of a learning. The arc of learning, as it comes to an end, and the students have been set their learning aims or intentions, they've been supported by the teacher to do the tasks. A self or peer assessment, which could be done verbally, or it could be done more formally through writing, would be done towards the end of the lesson sequence, in which the students reflect on the extent to which they've achieved the learning aims and maybe set themselves some action points. Exit tickets, I like to include here. It's very nice to do with the range of learners, particularly primary and younger learners, and they could be also linked to self and peer assessments. So students are identifying some things that they've learned in the class, and they're demonstrating them to the teacher in order to close the lesson sequence. Within this, it's always nice to have within this framework of formative assessment, it's always nicer to have a summative assessment target to aim for during a period of learning. This CEFR linked speaking and writing classroom task, for example, will often be taken from the course books or the materials that you're using. and it's the opportunity for the teacher to give the students a more formal or objective grading on the end of unit tasks. And ideally, if we're focusing on production, which is often what students need, there would be a speaking or writing task. They can generate information to feed into reports and back to school departments and parents, so students can more effectively see their progress. What's nice is that they can give the formative assessment tools more of a focus to aim towards. So if the objectives of the term are to support the students to do research and give a presentation on a particular topic, all of the formative assessment techniques that would be used in all of the classes in the lead up to, say, a monthly, that as the task of the month, would be supporting them to do the summative aspect of the assessment and succeed in it. We also have homework and portfolios, diaries and journals. And homework is always a great way to support learning and consolidate what's done in class. Portfolios, diaries and journals are a way to on the parts of the student so that they can showcase them potentially to their parents if they wanted to. Whether or not they're given a formal grade by the teachers really depends. The external tests to the classroom. So often there are national tests that we have to prepare students for, and students often prepare for international tests as well. If we're working with an aligned system in which the materials are teaching the same concept of language as the assessments, and that's being delivered in the classroom, then the national assessments that they may have to prepare themselves for they will be able to do them naturally. So the formative assessment cycle, as you probably got an impression from the previous slide, is a cycle. So we look at understanding at the beginning of the cycle where the learner is at the moment, to then towards where they are going, and then think about how to get there. Just to unpack that slightly, we start by thinking about where the learner is. So learners need evidence of the current status of their learning by teacher, student, or the peer, whether that's vertical teacher feedback or horizontal student or peer feedback. Learners need to know how their work or learning is in relation to the success criteria. So it's really important for the teacher to express what the intentions of the classes and the learning periods are. They then need to know where they're going, so they need to know what the learning goal is. This could be both for the whole class or on a more individual basis. And they need to know how they can get there. So learners need to know how they can close the gap between where they are now and where they need or want to be. So let's think about this in a contextualized example. A year 5 class of learners are practicing how to describe their favourite animal. Let's think about how a teacher would bring in different formative assessment techniques in a lesson like this. She might start off by sharing the learning aims, so writing things like, I can describe an animal using at least 3 adjectives on the board, and explains what success looks like. So if students understand that by the end of the class, they're going to be asked to reflect on this. Therefore, that's where they have to go so that they can then judge whether they've got there or not. During the class, the teacher is asking questions frequently. What words can we use to describe animals, for example, to elicit vocabulary and check existing knowledge, and also to know whether to feed in new words or expressions that students didn't know. See, there's a lot of observation and feedback. So as students are writing and doing the tasks, the teacher walks around and observes, noting who uses adjectives correctly, who needs support, giving brief verbal feedback. Then at the end of the class, students review their work with the checklist. Did I use 3 adjectives? Again, bringing the learning sequence to a close based off of the point of reference at the beginning of the class when the learning aims were shared. Then at the end of the class, before leaving, each learner writes 1 adjective they used well and 1 they want to learn better. So these techniques within a sequence of a lesson, I've really focused on the techniques rather than the detailed tasks in that example, support students to acquire new abilities, skills, and knowledge. So formative versus summative, we've commented on this quite a bit now, but if I said a 2-minute speaking task, which is a presentation on a topic that the student has researched, if we were to set this to a group of, say, 14-year-old students at a pre-intermediate level, would this be formative or summative? And I'd like you to think about that question for just 10 seconds. And the answer is, we can't simply categorize assessment as being definitively formative or summative. The same tool can be used for both types of assessment, both approaches. We must consider the use of the data that is gathered. So if the teacher is setting this as the end of the month objective for the course, and does this and actually sets a practice opportunity for the students to do research and do the presentation maybe twice in the lead up to that. When they're doing their initial research and having their initial practices, if they're doing self and peer assessment and looking at what the criteria are for an effective 2-minute presentation, organization, content, fluency, etc., and then acting on that feedback to make their second attempt better, and then reflecting on the second attempt to make the last attempt better, those first and second attempts are formative. The students are having a go. They're getting some feedback. They're making their presentations better so that they can do the end of the month final objective, which the teacher marks to the best of their ability. And that makes the last one, which the teacher marks, assigns a meaningful score to. It might be assessing it against a CEFR descriptor at a level of approaching, meeting, or exceeding, and that gets put into their portfolios, which are shared to parents. Here we have a summative use of this particular task. Now, we've covered quite a bit of theory there over the last 25 minutes, and I'd like to move into the practical part of the presentation, in which we'll actually look at 4 different scenarios, all based around classroom-based assessments. And I've tried to bring in some of the different tools that we've covered. So we're going to be looking at homework, we're looking at tests, we're looking at self-reflection, some of the concrete uses of tools in contexts. And for each example that I give you, I'd like you to think about whether the teacher in the examples using them in a more formative or a more summative way. Let's think about the first one, and I'll give you 20 seconds now to read this. So we've got a scenario 1 is called the final before the final. And the teacher's giving her final exam 2 weeks in advance of the end of term exam. Those students who do not pass it spend the next 2 weeks identifying and closing their gaps so that they prepare to retake the test. And the new test isn't the same test, it's a equal test. So it's a same learning targets, but different content. Those students who pass the exam the first time move to enrichment activities. So Ms. Jones sees many students passing the first time, who pass the exam first time, going on to help their peers. Now, what do you think? Do you think Ms. Jones is using this in a more formative or a more summative way? So this is very much in the middle here. We've got the formative arena and the summative arena, and then we've got this area where they're both being used together. And I've put it in the arrow in the middle here because the end goal is the summative test that they do at the end of the semester. But Ms. Jones is bringing in a big formative element when she lets them do the practice test to see where they stand, to see how much more work they need to get to where they need to be, which is to pass the end of unit test. So in this case, we've got an example that's very much bringing formative and summative assessment approaches together in a meaningful and learner-orientated way. In scenario 2, we've got homework as optional, and I'm going to read this one out to you as it's a bit longer. So in Miss Nagum's class, all homework is optional. He tells the students that they don't have to do it. It's just to help them practice so that they will do well on the test. He reminds them that at the end of the unit, there will be an assessment which will count as their grade for the unit. He then suggests that if they do not feel confident in their test-taking abilities, they should go ahead and do the homework and keep it in a portfolio in the classroom. If, after the test, students discover they didn't do as well as they think or they would have liked, they can go back to the portfolio, seek evidence that they had actually mastered the content, and then he says he will use that evidence to adjust their test score without requiring them to do the test. For several years, he has used the progress and he's noticed 100% turn-in on all homework by students. It seems many are concerned about their test-taking abilities. So what do you think? Is this more formative or more summative? Now, as this is indirectly related to the performance on the exam, so it may or may not impact on the exam. All Miss Nagum's doing is using the shadow of the exam as an impetus to encourage students to do homework and to give some meaning to the homework. They get a clear understanding of how the homework could benefit them potentially on the end of unit test, so they become more diligent about completing it and using it to log evidence that could potentially support them in the case where they don't feel like they performed as well as they could on a test. So in this case, he's very much supporting them to become reflective learners that are constantly looking at where they are, where they want to be, and thinking of ways about how to get there. So doing their homework. Okay, let's go on to look at scenario 3. Mr. Davron teaches an upper secondary English class at B1 level. His students are preparing to give a short oral presentation on a person who inspires me. 2 weeks before the presentation, he introduces a self-assessment checklist to guide preparation and reflection. Together, the class reviews key criteria. So here, Mr. Davron is looking at 4 criteria around a successful presentation. They are clear organisation, so including an introduction, main points, conclusion, use of linking phrases, firstly, for example, in conclusion, appropriate pronunciation and intonation, and eye contact and engagement, so paralinguistic features. During practice sessions, students record themselves and use the checklist to evaluate their performance. They highlight areas for improvement and get small goals and set small goals, such as I need to speak more slowly here, or I should add some more linking phrases here to make it clearer, etc. On the presentation day, each student submits their completed self-assessment form alongside the teacher's rubric. The teacher considers, both when assigning the final summative grade, acknowledging reflection and improvement as part of the achievement. Mr. Davron explains, your final mark isn't just about your performance today, it's about how you've used feedback to improve along the way. What do you think? I'll give you 20 seconds to think. Where does this sit? More in the summative, more in the formative, or in between the spheres? You might be getting the idea here. Many of these examples are purposefully chosen to illustrate how formative and summative assessment can come together in the classroom. This is another example of a largely formative approach, which is supporting the students to be the best versions of themselves, to perform as well as possible in the task when they're asked to do it. So he's really, really pushing them to reflect deeply on what they've been asked to do and feed that reflection back into the practice and planning stages so that when they execute the presentation, it's the best that it can possibly be. However, because it also includes the actual presentation, which Mr. Davron would mark, then it does have a summative element to it. And we're coming to the last scenario here. So Ms. Karimova teaches English to 10-year-olds. She's noticed that her students often wait for her to tell them how well they've done, rather than thinking about their own learning. To help them take more ownership, she introduces a simple self-assessment routine at the end of every writing activity. When students finish a short paragraph task, for example, describe your weekend, she projects 3 statements on the board. The first one is very similar to the previous example. I can use past tense verbs correctly. The second, I can write 4 to 5 sentences that are connected and make sense. And the third one, I can check my spelling and punctuation. Students read each statement and use coloured dots, similar to a traffic light system, in their notebooks, with green meaning I did this well, amber suggesting they need more practice, and red indicating that they need maybe more support from the teacher. Before collecting the work, Mrs. Karimova asks, if you marked any yellow or red, what will you do next time to improve? This helps her plan short feedback sessions and gives students a clear sense of what to focus on next. So what do you think? Is this more formative or more summative or in between? This last example, I've put it purely in the formative sphere, as there's no particular summative test that's looming over the class. The whole intention of the class and Ms. Karimova's prerogative is to look at how she can support students to effectively reflect on what they're learning, how well they're learning it, and whether they need to take any additional steps to get there more quickly. Obviously, a more appropriate approach for primary learners. So just to reflect on those 4 scenarios, I think one of the first points to draw out here is there's no purely summative assessment that would ever be associated with learning. If we're doing assessments in class for no learning reason, if they're disassociated or things that we're being asked to do just to generate numbers or letters, which are quite arbitrary, this has no real effect on learning. So none of my examples were only focused in the summative sphere. Learning happens when a formative approach is taken to assessment so it can support learners to become reflective and to become the best versions of themselves by thinking about what they're learning, how well they've learnt it, and in the case where they need to further improve, what steps they can take. Summative assessments, as I hope to have exemplified, form if they're closely connected to the content of the course, so we're thinking about achievement orientated and progress orientated tests and assessments that are reported on to parents at the end of semesters or academic years. If they're integrated and coherent with the courses, they provide an excellent focus for the formative assessment to support reflective learning in the lead up to those summative assessment events. By no means will the summative tests be the majority of the time. It's the formative assessment approaches that we looked at earlier in the presentations that really should be occupying the majority of teachers' time and students' time in the classroom, so that the summative events, when they do happen, as they can be very motivating for students and learners, they are successful in them and they are proud of the grades that they get. So with those comments, I'd now like to move on to the conclusion slide. So some key takeaways I hope you've taken from this presentation are we can use many tools in the classroom for both formative and summative assessment. It's very much how we use the data that's generated from these tools which make the tools either formative or summative. So it's important to consider how you're using this information. If it's to support the learners to reflect and act in a meaningful way so as to learn more effectively, it's formative. It's non-threatening, it's completely oriented towards the students. If it's done to generate a grade or an assessment, it might be a mark or a letter or a number. Hopefully it would be an evaluation of how well a criteria is met. But even so, if that's conducted in a way that students can't then subsequently affect it, and then it's also communicated to parents or school leads, then it's summative. Learners will do best when they understand what success looks like for any given task. They understand how they can close the gap in their knowledge and skills, and they receive opportunities for meaningful feedback from the teacher, the peer, or self-assessment. So I hope you've enjoyed that presentation. I hope it's given you some ideas to think about and to potentially look at implementing in your own classrooms. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Aidan Holland, for this valuable presentation. Your reflections remind us of the importance of formative assessment in our classroom, not only as a way to measure learning, but as a tool that supports student engagement, reflection, and continuous improvement. Thank you very much, Aidan. Now, we'd also like to thank all of the participants for your comments, your questions, and your very active participation through the chat, which have helped us in this space as a truly meaningful and dynamic exchange. We would like to warmly thank all of the participants from Colombia, Chile, Peru, and Mexico for your active participation, interest, and true and thoughtful comments in the chat. Your engagement enriches our discussions and helps strengthens this learning community. Now, please remember to register your attendance for these days. We have already posted the link for today's surveys in the chat. It is essential to register your attendance via the surveys that will be shared at the end of the day. And it is not necessary to share your personal details in the chat. Instead, we encourage and invite you to share with us where are you tuning in from, which place of Latin America and Mexico. We ask you to carefully please verify the information that you enter in all of the forms. Remember that your certificate will be issued according to the name you have registered. As a reminder for Prony teachers, now we have a short break before continuing with this next session at 4 p.m. time, Mexico time, of course. You can join the following session by clicking on the Entre Aquí or Join Here button available in your event programming. See you in a few minutes.